Well, I love beekeeping because it just offers a continual challenge. It absorbs you, totally absorbs you.
Every day is different. You can go to the same colony 2 days in a row and there'll be something different about their temperament, their behaviour, and you have to ask yourself why. And to me it's like a mystery, it's like an intrigue.
Beekeeping is a partnership between the bee and the beekeeper.
It's just absolutely thrilling to feel that you're a part of this.
Nobody in the family is a beekeeper. When I was a teenager, I bought a book on beekeeping and tried to see what it was all about. Later on, I got the chance to actually do some practical beekeeping. I remember getting stung on the very first day. I got stung quite a lot, and it did put me off, especially as I used to react quite badly. And I gave up beekeeping for a few years, but then it held a certain fascination and I came back to it. When I started, I brought bees in from quite a lot of places. I ended up with about 20 colonies. I built the numbers up quite quickly because I got a bit carried away with it. They were mostly what was known as buckfast crosses. Buckfast sounds like a local bee, but it's based on imported bees. Bees in this country are mostly hybrids of one sort or another. They're a mixture of different subspecies. What has happened in Britain over 150 years is we've imported loads and loads of bees, queen bees, from Europe. Those imports have just increased and increased. We haven't been doing anything to help the native subspecies, so it is a surprise that it's survived. We'd had the Isle of Wight disease in the early 20th century, which had wiped out vast numbers of stock. The native strain was particularly hard hit. We think it was a virus that came in with imported bees. And generally the thing was the native bee is extinct, but nevertheless the native strains seem to survive in certain pockets. And I did bee inspecting around Cornwall for about 5 years. There were places where you'd go and you'd be surprised because they were, oh, these look quite native.
When we moved to our house, I made a herb patch and it was covered in all kinds of pollinators. 3 or 4 years later, there were hardly any. And I just wanted to say, this is not right. What can I do? At Mount Edgecombe, we are a native bee reserve. So our brief is to conserve the native honeybee to the highest quality that we can. That means that we are selective in the bees that we keep here. That's so that we can really build up a good community of colonies that are representative of the species.
One year we had quite a lot of honey and we went down to Mount Edgecombe House. We were trying to see if they wanted to buy some of our honey and they were very pleased to take it. The lady in charge said, would I like to look after the bees that they'd got there? I was only too pleased to take on some more bees. They were much darker than the bees I was working for a start. They physically looked different and I was a little bit nervous about them. Everything I'd heard and read about bees said that the old native bee, the old dark bee, was an aggressive bee that really has lost favour. But much to my surprise, I found that they were actually less aggressive than the ones I was used to working. And after 2 or 3 visits, I suddenly realised that there's nothing wrong with these bees, they're perfectly good bees. Gradually I went along that road trying to select and improve this type of bee.
Once Joe was able to work within a subspecies of the bee, it made it so much more interesting to see how you can work with the bees and select in a way to get the best out of them. So we're working really hard to build up family trees to ensure that we're keeping the best and moving on the rest. How do we know whether they are black bees or not, whether they are native bees? To begin with, all we can do is use your eye, use your experience, use your common sense, and use time Too many people want to raise a nuke and pass it on. What we do is keep them for 8 weeks. And by that time, we will know that all the bees in that hive belong to the queen who is laying in that hive. Then we can call them, as far as we know, dark European honeybees.
If I go and buy one queen bee or several queen bees that have been bred in Greece, for example, they're bringing in genes to this area which have never experienced these conditions, and they're spreading those genes around this area, and that's what I think is quite damaging. Obviously, because we've got hybridised bees, which often are not very pleasant, the temper goes bad, they get very swarmy, they tend to get traits that we wouldn't really choose. And so how do we get a decent bee? The only way up to now, people have thought, well, I need to buy in a new queen. So they go and buy a queen, and it's usually an imported queen, nice and docile. Next generation crosses with whatever bees are around here, and we get that hybridisation, and we start losing our qualities. For me, that's one of the main reasons for trying to stick to one strain of bee. And the easiest strain to stick to is the one that naturally dominates in this area.
We got our bees from the Rhine Peninsula. The bees are the European dark honeybee, and they're bred by Joe Widdicombe and also by Kathy and her group at Mount Edgecombe.
For Matt and I, it was just purely logic. They're a native stock, they're from across the water, and they should be a localised species that are adapted to this particular maritime eco sort of system.
Because we were starting out, we didn't know the ins and outs really about the importation and the kind of risks that brings. When we had the two laid out in front of us, it's like, well, why would you do that? It just made a logical sense, really.
It's not a case of, well, we want to go back to 1850 before there were any imports. We want the bee that was around then. We don't. We want a bee that's right for our times now, that can survive the rigours of climate and so on, and can adapt to changing conditions. We select the ones that are docile, we select the ones that are most productive, and so as the environment changes, our bees change, our selection of bees will change. They can keep in harmony with nature, but adapting to current conditions. We don't want to say you've got to have native bees, but people have got to start with what's in their area and try and get a bit of uniformity to them, and that's the secret really, and then progress becomes more rapid.
We are very, very lucky because we're living on a peninsula here. Bees are reluctant to fly over water, so we have a higher chance of having the bees on the peninsula stay on the peninsula. Obviously, you've got to be careful about inbreeding, and we do that by working with the other beekeepers on the Rhine Peninsula and trying to ensure that we're all breeding with the same subspecies, but not with the same core stock. At Mount Edgecombe, part of our responsibility is to make people aware of what a treasure it is and how we can't afford to lose it. We have a responsibility to stop the decline. We are the only beekeepers that are allowed to keep bees on 865 acres of land. We're based in formal gardens which are full of flowers and full of the general public. We have been called the public interface of this movement. Visitors to the gardens can come and see what we're doing, can come and talk to us. And education is also for beekeepers. They can come and work with us, because how can you make a decision about whether dark bees are any good if you have no experience of them? That's the way that we get the word out there.
Publicity about the decline of the honeybee has brought a constant stream of new beekeepers into it. And of course they need to get bees from somewhere. And that's principally what's driven the rise in imports, I think. So there's lots of education needed. I think the message is getting across. People are realising the value of local livestock, and I think that can only be a good thing.
Urban beekeeping movement, it's born out of people wanting to take care of the environment. Like it's their way of like being to show that they can do something.
I think changing the way we see honeybees and how we can work with the bees to improve their ecosystems and then by proxy our ecosystems.
It's not to just see them as things you can get honey from, because there's a whole sort of list of things that they can tell you about the health of the environment and how to improve an ecosystem as well. So I think whatever bees you keep, to see them more than just something you can crop honey from. Stop the decline of the native honeybee. I think, again, it's having credible sources where you can procure from. I think that's really important, to have a list of credible sources you can buy from.
I mean, everybody who's in beekeeping is there for a reason. My reason is I like nurturing things. I like seeing things grow. I like seeing things contented. I just felt I could make a difference. I don't think beekeeping is the right word. I see it as bee managing. If we are going to put bees into a box for our convenience, then we have a responsibility to make sure that they are happy in there and that we're meeting their needs. Where I am, I think I'm really lucky because I'm in the middle of a volcanic movement to increase the native honeybee.
How do we get out of this slight mess we've created? I think answers can be found, and we can make a difference, and we can select and improve our honeybee.